At a certain point, silence becomes impossible to ignore. Not the silence after applause, not the silence between songs, but the kind of silence that settles in when something essential slowly steps out of view. There was no single headline that announced it. No breaking alert flashing across screens, no viral clip demanding attention. Just a pause. A moment where people stopped scrolling and felt something they couldn't immediately explain. A heaviness, a stillness, a strange emotional echo. Something felt different. That's how Richard Smallwood returned to conversations, not through noise, not through spectacle, but through absence. And absence, when it's felt deeply enough, can be louder than any sound. Richard Smallwood was never loud in the way modern fame demands. He didn't chase attention. He didn't manufacture urgency. He didn't build his work to interrupt you mid-scroll. His music never begged to be noticed, and that is exactly why it endured. Because while the industry chased volume, he wrote for people who were barely holding themselves together. People who weren't looking for excitement, they were looking for steadiness. People who didn't need hype, they needed honesty. They needed music that didn't rush them out of grief, out of doubt, out of exhaustion. This is not a breaking news story. This is not a countdown of events. This is a reflection on why his music refuses to fade. Because what Richard Smallwood created wasn't just gospel music, it was survival. Over time, Richard Smallwood's public presence became quieter. Not because his influence disappeared, not because his work stopped mattering, but because the world began moving faster than the kind of music he made. And when an artist like that grows still, the silence feels personal. People didn't just miss the performances, they missed the reassurance. Choir directors began pulling out old sheet music again. Singers revisited arrangements they hadn't touched in years. Listeners returned to songs they only played when life felt too heavy to carry alone. Memories surfaced quietly, not in trending topics, but in living rooms, in rehearsal halls, in late-night car rides. Richard Smallwood didn't write songs you casually remembered. He wrote songs that lived with you. And when people began revisiting his work, they weren't asking what happened to him. They were asking something deeper. Why does this music still work when everything else feels temporary? To understand the music, you have to understand the foundation. Richard Smallwood was raised in a home rooted in faith, but not celebrity. Faith was not a performance, it wasn't staged or packaged, it was lived, quietly, daily. Music entered his life not as ambition, but as instinct. From a very young age, the piano wasn't an instrument to him, it was a translator, a way to express emotion that words couldn't safely hold. While other children learned music to perform, to impress teachers or audiences, Richard learned music to understand emotion when it didn't make sense, to understand tension when belief and doubt existed together, to understand faith when faith felt fragile and unanswered. That difference matters, because artists who chase applause write differently than artists who chase clarity. Applause demands reaction. Clarity demands truth. At Howard University, often called the Mecca of Black education, those instincts collided with discipline. Classical training, theory, structure, and instead of choosing one world, Richard Smallwood fused them. He didn't abandon gospel, he elevated it. Musicians recognize it instantly. The Smallwood sound, suspended chords that refuse to resolve too quickly. Harmonies stacked so tightly they feel like pressure in the chest. He treated the piano like architecture. Every note had weight. Every progression carried intention. The choir was not decoration, it was structure. It was force. This approach rewired gospel music. Young musicians across continents spent years trying to understand it, not to copy it, but to feel why it moved people so deeply. When the Richard Smallwood singers emerged, gospel music gained a new identity. Elegant, sophisticated, intentional. Then came a moment that pushed his work beyond boundaries. When Whitney Houston recorded I Love the Lord, the world heard what gospel could be without compromise. The music crossed cultures without losing its soul. Behind total praise was not celebration. It was exhaustion. Written during one of the most emotionally overwhelming periods of his life, the song wasn't planned. It arrived, not as ambition, as survival. What followed became one of the most enduring compositions in gospel history, sung globally, across languages, across generations. Proof that sometimes the most powerful music is written when strength feels absent. When trends shifted, many pioneers faded. Richard Smallwood evolved. With vision, his sound expanded without dilution. Complex, accessible, cinematic. One of his bravest contributions was honesty. By speaking openly about mental health, he challenged silence, especially within faith communities. Faith, he showed, does not cancel humanity. Today, his influence is everywhere, in arrangements, in choirs, in musicians who refuse to choose between discipline and soul. Music outlasts memory. Richard Smallwood taught us that music can be a bridge between pain and praise, between humanity and the divine. He didn't leave noise behind. He left refuge. And long after the world moves on, that refuge remains. So when you hear his music again, don't ask when it was written. Ask yourself, why does this still understand me?